Hello everyone and welcome to our live question and answer event for Prince Henry's Grammar School. My name's Janet Sheriff and I'm the Executive Head Teacher here at Prince Henry's. Now, we hope that the technology will work perfectly this evening, but do bear with us if there are any glitches, because this is the first time that we've done an event like this. But the reason that we've done it is that we thought it was really important to give prospective parents an opportunity to ask individual questions about Prince Henry's. So what will happen is that we will start by answering some of those questions that have already been posted ahead of the event. I'm going to answer some questions and then I'm going to hand over to 3 of my SLT colleagues to answer some questions. While we're providing those answers, there is opportunity for you to post some additional questions on the question and answer box, which is likely to be on the right-hand side of your screen. And some of those questions we may answer as we go through the presentations, but others we may post the answer on the question and answer box part of the screen. So do keep an eye on that as we go through the event as well. So that question and answer box will remain open for the next 25 minutes. So it will close at, well, it's about 20 minutes. It will close at 6:25. And then we will round up and it will come back to me and I'll attempt to answer any outstanding questions. So our aim is to answer all of the questions that are posed this evening, but we may run out of time, in which case I do encourage you to look at our school website, because the parent and carer section of that website contains a wealth of information, and it's likely that that information will contain the answer to any outstanding questions that you have. Okay, so straight on to the questions that have been posed in advance then. So the first question that I'm answering is, how do we look after children in such a big school? And this is a regular question that we have, and I think fundamental to our support for individual students is our pastoral structure, and particularly our personal tutor system. So each personal tutor works with approximately 30 students, and they meet with those students every single morning for about 20 minutes before the children go off to their lessons. And that regular contact means that the personal tutors and the children develop a really strong relationship, and the personal tutor quickly gets to know the individuals within their group. And that means that they can have a really good overview of the both the academic and the social development and progress of children in their group, and they can provide the appropriate support and praise when that's needed for the individual. And the personal tutor part of the pastoral system is complemented by the fact that we have non-teaching year managers for each of our year groups in school. And their role is to provide an overall support for student well-being and the individuals within their year group. And then we also have our pastoral support officer, and their role is to work with those students that need an even higher level of individual support in school. Okay, so the next question was, what do we do to support children's mental health at Prince Henry's? And I think the pastoral structure, which I've just described, is certainly a core thing that helps to support individual students' mental health at school. But we also do a lot more. In fact, our school has been awarded MindMate friendly status for all of the things that we do to support children's mental health. And one of the things that we do, for example, is that we ensure that across our whole curriculum that we take every opportunity to focus on education for mental health. So, for example, educating students so that they are open and understanding of any mental health issues, so whether that's their own or other people's. And we educate students about how to secure good mental health for example, the focus on healthy eating or the importance of physical exercise. And finally, we educate students so that they are confident and they have self-belief, and that they have that understanding of the importance of diversity and recognising that people are different and should still be equal. And all of that and the broad education that we provide really supports students' mental health. But alongside that, for students that do require some additional support for mental health, we have within school trained and accredited mental health workers and mental health first aiders, and they provide support to those that need some additional help. And we also use external professionals to provide mentoring and counselling support for those in greatest need. So my final question that I'm going to answer is, can I come into school and visit the school in person? So we had a few people contacting school to ask if they can actually come in and visit in person. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 and the restrictions that we've put in place to keep our students and staff safe, we are unable to offer individual parent visits to school at the moment. However, we will continue to review that, and certainly if your child manages to secure a place at Prince Henry's, then we will look, depending on the circumstances, to organise some parental visits later on in the spring or summer terms. Okay. So those are the three questions that I wanted to answer from those posted earlier. I'm now going to hand over to Simon Day, who is the Key Stage 3 Progress Leader, for him to answer some of those pre-posted questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Sheriff. As Mrs. Sheriff said, I'm Simon Day, I'm the Key Stage 3 Progress Leader here at Prince Henry's, which means I'm in charge of the academic and pastoral progress of students across all of years 7, 8 and 9. The first question we've been asked is, what do you do to help year 7 students settle into high school? We do have a really extensive transition offer, and we understand that at this moment in time and throughout the whole of year 6, the step change to secondary school is undoubtedly one that will concern students and parents alike, and will represent a number of challenges. So what we want to do is we want to demystify the process and make sure that students are as confident as possible and have spent as much time in school as possible before we get to September. Now this year, just gone, clearly the transition process was quite different. We had to do a lot of things virtually, but it didn't stop us attempting to make sure that we had as much contact with all of the students coming to us, whether they're coming from one of our large feeder schools or they're coming on their own from one of the smaller primary schools that do send students to us. I will talk though, however, more about what we do in person, because it is our genuine hope that come next summer, we'll be able to do our transition offer in person. So what happens is that in March and April, when we first get the confirmed list of students coming to us, we send out welcome packs, letters from senior students and from our head teacher, just outlining the process that we'll be going through in the summer term. In April to May time, probably just after SATs, if they do happen, we will be meeting the students and teaching staff in their primary school setting. We think it's really important to come and see them in their primary school setting rather than invite them into us first of all, because it allows them to be in a setting that they're confident and comfortable in. We want to talk them through the processes and the different structures we have here at Prince Henry's, and we want to start that process of allowing them to meet people like myself, like their year manager, also like members of the SEND team, the SENCO and other support staff will attend their primary schools as well. That meeting with students and teaching staff allows us to gain a knowledge and understanding of the students as well, whether that's from questions and answers that they might ask, things that they might tell us about their concerns and their hopes for secondary school, or from the information that teaching staff can provide us with as well. Our aim is to build as full a portfolio of knowledge and information about each individual student so that we can make sure their transition to secondary school is as successful as possible. Alongside that, we want to engage our parents as well. This year we had to do that through a questionnaire. Oftentimes we'll do it through meeting face to face, addressing your questions and concerns, discussing what the expectations are and all the different opportunities you have at Prince Henry's. And that word opportunity is something we come back to time and again. We want to show just the host of opportunities that you get through lessons, extracurricular activities, all the different things that Prince Henry's offers to make sure that our students become really rounded, positive individuals. At the end of all that, when we've built up that full portfolio of information, we also ask our students to complete a transition portfolio, something that allows us to assess the levels that they've been working at across a whole host of subjects, but also provides us with evidence to pass on to their teachers, and also introduces them to the school, the type of language we use around behaviour, expectations, attitude to learning, and all of those things that we want our students to do as positively as possible. The real crowning glory, if you like, of it all, though, are the 3 induction days that take place in July. That's a chance for students to come into Prince Henry's and spend 3 days doing lessons with their form group, meeting their fellow tutees and their form tutor as well, other key members of staff, and getting used to the environment they'll be in from September. We know if we can spend as much time as possible with our students, that all of the anxieties and worries that may show themselves about the step up to secondary school will be alleviated. We will make sure that they're confident, that they know where to go, one of the key things they're always worried about, all Year 6 students are worried about, and that they know what the routines and expectations are. We're really proud of the transition offer that we have. We think it is extensive and make sure that it reaches all of our students, because every single one of them, whether they're coming from a very close by school in large numbers or a small school on their own, every one of them is a Prince Henry student, and we want to make sure they're fully integrated into our school. So that's the transition process. The next question was, how do you put your students into tutor groups? Well, the transition process plays a huge part in that, because the gathering of information from teachers, from students and from parents allows us to put together a really clear picture of each individual. Then what we do is we split the year group into half, based on the language they'll be studying, French or Spanish. The data that we've then gathered from parents, students and teachers allows us to then divide them into either 4 or 5 forms on either side of the year group. In that division, we ensure that there's an equal mix of gender, ability, background, primary school, student need, and so on. It gives us a class size of around 30. I know that's what someone asked on the question and answer bar earlier. So the class sizes this year are anywhere between 20 and 30 in Year 7. Students coming in on their own, we make a really conscious effort to make sure we buddy them up with someone we think they'll get on really well with, which again is why we don't just ask them what subject they're good at, we ask them what they like doing, we ask them what their hobbies are, what their interests are, and we try to do a little bit of social engineering. This is something we feel like we're quite good at, because the form groups we put together are really positive, cohesive units. We also work hard to make sure if they're coming in large cohorts from feeder primary schools, that we're dividing them up so that they're going to work well in their little subgroup. Having said that, one thing we never do is we don't base them on friendship groups, but we do take into account if there have been any issues and ensure that those students don't have to be in the same class as each other. The issue around friendship groups is that if we do put them in friendship groups, very quickly, once students get to secondary school, their friendship groups change, shift, alter, because of the different things they're involved in. So we know it's for the best to make sure we separate them out into a really positive group who will push each other to do their very, very best. They will be together for 5 years, so this is a really essential mix, and we do spend an awful lot of time getting it right and listening to the information that we've gathered across the whole suite of people who tell us different things. So how do school meals work, and can I see what my child is buying? So this next bit sounds a little bit like a selling exercise, but that's what this is anyway. So school dinners are excellent, and there is lots and lots of choice, and that is one of the things that I think that students moving from primary school, where you might have 1 or 2 choices, or it's packed lunch or hot meals, to where we have Henry's Diner with all sorts of different hot and cold options, it's a real sort of sea change for them. They can choose to have school dinners on some days and packed lunches on others. They don't need to stick to any sort of set pattern. They may well decide that they're bringing packed lunches if they're doing an extracurricular club on a lunchtime. That tends to be where students will look to have something they know that they've got, and they can maybe eat it at break time as well. There are also hot snacks at break time in Henry's, and there's a wide variety of meal options at lunchtime. Main meals and desserts, vegetarian, vegan options, paninis, soup, sandwiches, jacket potatoes. It really is that extensive. They pay for their lunches using a card. You top up that card through an online payment system. The beauty of that as parents is that you can then see what they're spending their money on. And if they are spending a little bit too much, bacon sandwiches at break time, shall we say, you can put a limit on those things and make sure we're checking in on those things. All of the options are put through a really sort of stringent test, and we are proud of the food that we offer our students because it is healthy and it does reflect the school's values in that way. I've also been asked to say, how will I know how my child is doing at school? Now, there are 3 points in the school year where we share with you a detailed progress report about how your child is doing. This covers both academic progress based on the targets we set students that we predict they will be able to reach as a minimum by the end of Key Stage 4, but we also use their attitude to learning, which is a rating from below expected all the way up to outstanding. And we feel confident that those 2 different indicators give us a really clear picture as to students who are making excellent progress in specific subjects or across the board, and those students who need support. Aside from that, though, we do have a series of different contact points. In Year 7, there are 2 additional ones in the form of the Year 7 Inquiry Week, which takes place at the end of September, and also the Parent Tutor Afternoon, which takes place in the last week of the first half term. Those are opportunities for you to contact either the student's year manager or their form tutor and to have a discussion around how they've settled in, how they're finding secondary school life, and what we can do to ensure they make the best progress they possibly can. Obviously, we also have the traditional parents' evening later in the year, where you have the chance to meet their individual subject teachers and find out about the progress they've been making. That said, we don't want you to wait till those contact points if you have a question or concern. That's why, as Mrs. Joe said, we're very proud of our personal tutor system and also our year managers. Each year group having a dedicated year manager who's a non-teacher, which means you can contact them should you have any concerns, whether that's academically or socially, to address those as quickly as possible. It's our intention to deal with those questions positively and really quickly to make sure no issues develop and that all students have a really positive experience. That's the end of my questions. I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Rowbottom, our Associate Head Teacher.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Simon. So I'll continue answering some questions. As Simon says there, I'm one of the associate head teachers in school, and the questions that I'll answer are questions that are appropriate in terms of some of the responsibilities I perform in school. So I'll start with, I've heard that Prince Henry's is an iPad school. What does that mean? So what that means is that each student in each year group has access to an iPad through our iPad scheme, which we run in conjunction with the Learning Foundation. And basically we ask each parent to donate a suggested amount to the scheme, and this allows us to provide an iPad for each student in the school to assist with their learning. The students have a clear rule structure to work within regarding the use of iPads, and are very clear that they are a device for enhancing their learning experience whilst they're in the building. There are clear sanctions for misuse of iPads within our discipline structure, and students only use their iPads in lessons for learning. We ask them to communicate more conventionally at other times in the day. My second question, how can I find out about school buses? Well, the school buses are now exclusively run by Connections. There's a link on our website that will take you to the Connections website where details of the routes can be found. Due to the current national pandemic, West Yorkshire Combined Authority have remained involved with our bus service this year. It's their intention that ultimately they'll step away and the full bus service, including tickets, whether they're bought on a daily basis or termly passes, will be purchased from Connections. All the PH services, so we have buses through from PH1 to PH8 currently, drop off and pick up in our grounds. Although this service is not currently used by our students, in more normal times we would have an X84 service, which is a public school bus, and when at school drop off and pick up times, that also comes into our school car park. At the moment, that's not running because they put on extra buses for our students due to the current challenges we face. Just finally on the buses, if you are looking at specific routes and you go through the website or you go to the Connections website, it's unlikely that PH8 will run next year as a single bus just due to the demand, but the PH6 and 7 would then pick up the demand from Burley and Wharfdale. So it might not be the PH8, but there will be a bus service that loops around and picks up students in Burley and Wharfdale. Next question for me, how does your discipline policy work? We operate a discipline policy within school referred to as positive discipline. Students receive stamps each week in their planner for positive behaviours, and on the odd occasion they get it wrong, they receive comments in their planner. The system allows us to see clearly how a student or a group of students is behaving or engaging across the school by looking at the stamps that they're receiving and the comments they're receiving. We can sanction or reward appropriately to maintain a positive learning environment for everyone. The system allows us to also identify common issues with groups of students or individuals, so support can be provided appropriately. Sometimes the challenges students face can be to do with struggling with home learning or various other things where it's appropriate for us to support that child. Because the reward stamps and negative comments are recorded in the student planner, our parents and carers can also see how the child's behaving. When a student reaches certain milestones, they're able to be rewarded for their positive behaviours, but similarly, if there's too many negative behaviours being displayed, then we would apply our hierarchy of sanctions appropriately to that child. Final question for me, how do you deal with bullying? In our school sanctions, we consider bullying to be an extremely serious offence. I have to say we don't deal with many instances of bullying. Clearly students fall out every now and again, but where we establish that a student or a group of students have been bullying another student, we almost exclusively remove that student to our isolation room for a period of a specified period of time. I can say with some assurance that we don't have many instances of bullying in our school community because the students fill in an online questionnaire for us once every half term where they're asked specifically about whether they have experienced any bullying in the last half term, along with other questions like do they feel safe in school and a variety of other questions that just provide us key information about what's happening within our school community, and we do that on a half-termly basis. So that we're constantly able to pick up on anything that we might need to intervene with. I hope that's been helpful. I'm now going to pass over to one of our assistant heads, Phil Temple, and he will pick up some more of your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening everybody. My name's Phil Temple. I'm assistant head teacher here at Prince Henry's with responsibility for student support. That means I have a remit around all forms of well-being for students in school, school attendance, safeguarding and behaviour. I'm also responsible for our work around admissions and things, so I'm going to address some of those things with the questions that I've been asked to cover. So I'll make a start straight away. I've got 4 questions that came in earlier, and I've also, as part of that, picked up a little bit of an additional question which goes to some of the things I was going to say. So the first question I had was actually, what is the school's catchment area for admissions? Well, actually the school doesn't have a set catchment area. We don't operate with a predefined catchment area as part of our admissions processes. Our admissions policy is on the school website, and it's also within the Leeds City Council composite prospectus if you want to see it in detail. I'm sure many of you have looked at that already. But just to give you a very brief outline of the things that are contained within that and the things that would make a difference to whether you were going to likely be admitted to the school following an application. So as I say, there's no specific catchment area. The first priority goes to any young person with an education, health and care plan or a looked after child where we are the named school, and that would involve discussion with the school prior to admission around the ability of the school to meet the needs of that individual child. Within that first criterion as well, there is the opportunity, if your child has particular medical needs or mobility needs, which mean that Prince Henry's would be the only school where those needs could be met, there is an opportunity to apply through what we call criterion 1B. And that's something that if you are in that situation, you are likely aware of already, but that's something that you can follow up with Leeds City Council for additional information. Following from that, second criteria for us is around siblings, and that's siblings of students who are currently students at the school. After that, it would be the nearest school. So if we are the nearest school to your home address in a straight line, and you can find that information out quite easily, actually, if you go online. In any number of tools and search engines for looking at houses and things online will often tell you what the nearest school is. The only addition to what information you might get there is to bear in mind that St Mary's at Menston does not count within those usual procedures because it has a specific faith-based criterion within its admissions policy. Following on from that, in our policy, we do have a specific criterion around the students who attend both Bramhope and Poole and Wharfdale primary schools. And that's to reflect the fact that for a long number of years now, students from those schools have attended Prince Henry's Grammar School. Bus routes and provision is in place around accessing that from both Poole and Bramhope, despite the fact that they are often geographically, or as the crow flies, further away from the school than some other young people. And that meant that historically we've had situations where students who would have naturally expected to come to Prince Henry's Grammar School have not done so. So if your child is in year 6 at Bramhope or Poole, there is a specific criterion that addresses that issue. I know there was a question about that earlier. That doesn't necessarily guarantee a place at the school, depending on the numbers of students who live, for whom we are the nearest school. But to give an idea of numbers, as a general rule, around 2/3 of the places that are awarded each year in the school are for students for whom we are the nearest school. Around 1/3 of our intake, actually, we're not the nearest school, and they choose to come to us either because siblings attend here or for other reasons. Following on from that, there is a criterion around the children of staff at the school, which again is outlined in more detail in the policy. And finally, it is a simple tiebreaker around distance. So if you are in a straight line, measuring in a straight line from the centre of the school, the furthest away distance, the distance would be what makes a difference. Just to give you an indicator of that, last year, the furthest away student who was admitted on the distance criteria lived about 2.6 miles away from the school. That does, of course, fluctuate, and in recent years we've had some years where that was as high as 5 miles. 2.6 is around the norm for the last 2 or 3 years. That may help with some of the questions that were asked earlier. The second question I wanted to address also comes to admissions, and it says, is my child more likely to get a place if we make Prince Henry's our first preference? Now, if you've already looked, as I'm sure most of you have, at the admissions pro forma for Leeds, it offers you 5 preferences. And it's important that we recognise that they use the word preference deliberately. It doesn't make any difference to your allocation to Prince Henry's, whether we are your first, second, third, fourth or fifth preference. It's actually not legal for that to be the case. We're not allowed to consider that. And it's worth bearing in mind that actually it's not us as a school that will consider those applications. It would be Leeds City Council. Where it can make a difference, however, if you were to put Prince Henry's further down your preferences, is that actually you may be awarded one of your earlier preferences for another school, which means that actually your application for Prince Henry's Grammar School may never be considered. So it's important that you recognise how the places are allocated. Whatever is your first preference will be the first one that the local authority look at. And if they can offer you that first preference, they will do so. That means that if you are fortunate enough to get your first preference, the other 4 preferences will not actually be considered at any point. So whilst it's not the case that not putting us as first preference would impinge upon your right to be admitted to the school, it is worth bearing in mind that that can have an effect. So Leeds City Council will simply go through your preferences in order and allocate you the highest preference that they possibly can based on the criteria for that school and for the other schools that you made preference. The third question I wanted to answer was, can I discuss my child's individual needs with someone before applying for a place? Well, just to be clear, the application deadline for places is the 31st of October, which is 2 weeks tomorrow. sorry, 2 weeks on Saturday, and that is a deadline that's absolute for Leeds. If you miss that deadline, it does present problems for you as parents, because Leeds do not guarantee that they will consider your application within the normal round. It certainly is the case, however, that if you want to have a conversation about your individual child, we will try to facilitate that between now and the end of the half term. I know a lot of parents have already been in touch with myself, our Senko, Natalie Sadler, and the transition team and the Key Stage 3 team to ask specific questions, and that's absolutely appropriate if you feel you have concerns about which application or which preference you want to make Prince Henry's, and ask some specific questions. Your best bet, if you want to do that, is to contact the school and ask to speak to either myself, Phil Temple, or our Senko, Natalie Sadler. We'll do our best to answer any individual questions that you have, and hopefully that will suffice. Many of the questions that you might have will, of course, be answered during the transition processes that Mr. Day spoke about earlier. And it may be that you have concerns about your child starting high school that are beyond what we might think of as the norm, but actually you are quite sure that you want your child to come to Prince Henry's Grammar School. What I would say to you in that situation is that you don't need to have that conversation as imminently as the 31st of October. There will be lots of opportunity through transition and through some of the things I'm about to speak about for you to ask specific questions about your child's needs and what we can do to address those. Now that does lead me on to the fourth question that I had, which was, how do you support children with special educational needs or disabilities or additional needs? And also within the published questions, or the questions that have come in whilst we've been speaking, I know there were some specific questions around individual needs, one that was specifically around ASD or autistic spectrum conditions, and one around diabetes and a number of other things. So I'll just try to address broadly what we do for individual needs. And again, further to my last answer, if you have specific questions after that I don't answer this evening, then please get in touch with myself or Miss Sadler in the next few days to discuss those in more detail. So around special educational needs, we have a number of things in place and a number of people in place to ensure that that support for individual students is as strong as possible. So first of all, we have a large special educational needs department that's led by Miss Sadler, our Senko. She has an assistant, Miss Owens, and we then have 12 teaching assistants who work within school in a range of different faculties to support a whole range of individual students. We try to operate a system whereby the teaching assistants become experts in their faculty areas, and so they're not attached necessarily to an individual child. They will work with a number of different children to support their progress in those faculty areas. And if your child is someone who would need some of that support or would benefit from that support, then the transition processes that Mr. Day talked about earlier and any conversations you would have with Ms. Sadler will obviously lead to that support being provided. The other things that are in place around that, we do have in school our NET Centre, which is our student support centre, and many of our students with additional needs will access the NET Centre both in social times and actually during lessons for one-to-one intervention or mentoring or catch-up work or any range of different things that may occur with either the teaching assistants or other staff within school or from outside of school. Any student that has additional needs over and above what we would call our quality first teaching, so that's the work that goes on in the classroom to support all students, would likely have a pupil-centred passport or PCP. And that's a document that is prepared in collaboration with the student, the parents and the SEN team to ensure that all of the things that can be done to support that child in all of their different subject areas and around the school is shared effectively with all staff within school. That means that you have some input through that transition process and through those meetings with our special educational needs coordinator and other staff to contribute to what you think would be beneficial to your child. And we would be very clear about what those practical things were for all teaching staff in school to apply to support that child. As well as that, we have excellent links with other agencies. I mentioned earlier a question about autistic spectrum conditions, ASC, and for example, we have the STARS team, which is the lead specialist team around autism who work with us, who are actually in school today working with individual students. We have a number of students who access that support and get excellent support as part of our setting support arrangement. So that arrangement means that STARS will advise and support us as a setting to put in place autistic friendly practices within school around the environment, the teaching styles and a whole number of other things. They will also work specifically with individuals if needs be to generate more specific focused plans alongside our Senko. If a student has an education, health and care plan, and as I mentioned earlier, we will be going through a process hopefully already whereby a consultation is going on with our SENCO and the primary school and Leeds City Council to see that we can meet the needs that are outlined within that plan. An education, health and care plan would lead to us providing all of the things that are included within that plan, as you would expect. For those students who don't have an education, health and care plan, but do have acute additional needs or broader additional needs, as I've mentioned, a pupil-centred passport would still be written, and we would still seek to ensure that that child was supported in a very detailed way to make sure that the progress that they were making was as we wanted. So the fact that they don't have an EHCP doesn't impinge upon the support that they would get in school. Something else that I wanted to mention was our ambassadors programme. So for students who particularly may be vulnerable to transition and particularly anxious or nervous around that transition next year, or who have additional needs, we run an ambassadors programme through the SEN faculty, which is in addition to all of the transition activities that Mr. Day spoke about earlier. So that is something that your child would be identified for in communication with the primary school, with yourselves as parents, to ensure that they got additional support through that transition. That runs in June and July of the summer term and involves several visits to the school over and above the transition days that we've already mentioned. And that means that those children go from being in a situation where they're probably more anxious about transition than other students to actually feeling like they know more about it often than their peers, which is really helpful for removing some of the barriers to learning prior to September. I mentioned the Net Centre earlier, which provides a safe space for students if they need that. It's an opportunity for students to access support very immediately from the SEN team. So there are a number of things in there that hopefully I've mentioned, but just finally to say that none of those things are a fit-all situation, and to recognise that all young people with additional needs, just as all young people are unique, and we will always be in conversation with you as parents and the children in question to try and make sure that the support that was there was personalised to ensure that your child can make as much progress as is possible within the school. I think I've answered all 4 of the questions that I was asked to do so now, so I'm going to hand back now to Mrs. Sheriff, I think maybe picking up some of the things that have come in while we've been speaking. Thank you.
Hello, thanks, Phil. Actually, there's just one question remaining left to answer, and that's a question about after-school clubs. So the question was, can you tell us a little about after-school clubs, sports, art, music, etc.? Actually, we have such a wide range of extracurricular and enrichment activities at Prince Henry's. We have all of the usual, the music and lots of different sports to do, other clubs from Eco Warriors through to the Global Justice Group. There really is such a lot of different opportunities available at Prince Henry's, and you will find a lot more information about those opportunities on the school website, so I really would encourage you to look there. Just to say as well, though, that not all of these clubs are held after school. There's quite a lot of our extracurricular clubs are held at lunchtime as well, so it would be a matter of looking to see what club was run at what particular time. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of all of the questions that have been posted either in advance or on the question and answer bar just now. So it only remains for me to thank you for engaging with us on this event and for sharing your questions with us. I hope that the evening has been useful for you, but I would still encourage you to look at the parent and carer section of our website for the further details of information that would be really useful for you when making your choice of high school. So finally, thank you again for your engagement with us this evening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.